We've received a number of questions surrounding the Provider Relief Fund reporting requirements and some of the nuances as far as who has to report and who doesn't. If you look at the literature out from HHS in regards to the provider relief funds, as well as the information that we have put out. In fact, there's a link to our article inside of this description of this video and the article itself on our website under the video as well. But it's really important to know that although there is a cap of $10,000, the way that that $10,000 reporting threshold comes into play is anyone who has received $10,000 or more in any one reporting period has to report for the funds received in that reporting period. Now, hopefully that's a bit more clear, but I'm going to clarify it even more with some examples. But if we look at the very first reporting period, and that was April 10th of 2020 to June 30th of 2020. At the end of this month is the end of the reporting period for that. In other words, any funds that were received from April 10th of 2020 to June 30th, you have to make sure that you're reported by the end of September 2021. Now, who has to report? Again, it's that $10,000 threshold, and we have to look at any one of those periods. If you received in total inside of that period. So for example, if you received a $5,000 provider relief fund grant, if you will, and then turn around and in the second round in June of 2020 received another $4,000, you add those two together, that's $9,000. That's under the $10,000 threshold. You would not have to report for those funds. On the other side of the equation is if you receive $5,000 in April of 2020, and then another $6,000 in June of 2020, that is over the $10,000 threshold, and you would have to report on those particular funds. And that reporting has to be done by the end. Now, there are 4 different reporting periods. The first one goes to June 30th of 2020. The next one goes from July 1 of 2020 to the end of the year 2020. And then the first half of 2021 and the second half of 2021 are the other payment received periods is how they define them. And so now some of you may be going, okay, but I've actually received $19,000 in total. Well, it depends on when those funds came in. So let me give you another example. Let's use the first example that I gave and say, you received $5,000 in April. You received $4,000 in June of 2020. So that's that first reporting period. You're underneath that reporting threshold. Then again in November, you received another $9,000. Since they are not in the same payment received period, then they're considered separate fundings, and none of them individually are over the top of the $10,000 reporting mark. In other words, because the first reporting period only had a total of $9,000, and then that with the one grant, provider relief fund grant that was received in November is also under $10,000. Neither one of those are reportable. And so you don't have to meet those reporting requirements that are laid out in the information that HHS has released and the Provider Relief Fund gives. And so both are cleared. Now, on the flip side, you could be at $5,000 in April, $4,000 in June of 2020, and then of November of 2020 receive maybe $11,000. You would have to report on the usage of just those $11,000 by the time that the reporting deadline comes for that period. So for that second period, the reporting deadline is March 31st of 2020. You have to use all the funds by the end of the year of this year. And so that's kind of how it breaks down. And so now that also means that if you receive $5,000 in April and $6,000 in June, and then another $11,000 in November, you would actually have to report both for the first set of funds, that first $11,000 you received in the first payment received period, and also an additional reporting for the $11,000 you would have received for that second payment received period. And so any one of those individual periods that you received payments, not individual payments, but payments in total inside of that payment received period that exceed $10,000, that's when you have to report. Hopefully this clears it up. And hopefully it gives you a bit more guidance on when you have to make those reports for that provider relief fund money that you received. And we'll catch you next week.